We had a previous guest that me and IQ were talking to before we got you on, and he was promoting his film that he's going to be releasing at a film festival. But we are going to be speaking with a great guest here in just a few moments. But while we wait on our guest, talk to us, Dan, a little bit about what is your opinion of this cabinet that Trump has. This is a combination of people. I have never seen anything like this before. For instance, I believe it's the Treasury Secretary, openly gay, used to work for George Soros, and somehow Trump picked them? This is crazy to me.
But in reality, what was crazy was that in 2016, he listened to the Republican pundits in Washington who told him who he should pick, and the people he picked were disaster, and almost all of them were fired because they were incompetent.
Yes.
What I see is a diverse group of experiences, and I think they're going to shake a lot of stuff up.
Yes.
And we desperately need that. I mean, $2 trillion. They want to try and cut $2 trillion out of the budget by the time they're done in 2026.
Yes.
I just think that there's our guest.
Our guest is going to join us. Brian is going to be with us here in just a few seconds. But Dan,
he's with us.
Finish up on your point there, and then we'll go to Brian.
I just think that they are a diverse group of people. There are not a lot of Washington insiders, and so far, no generals.
Yeah. I guess I guess we can take solace in that. We have got a great guest with us today. He joins us live here on our big broadcast. And Brian, you have an incredible book. Tell me and Dan and IQ a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me on.
Yes.
It's called Land Rich, Cash Poor, and it's the untold history of the disappearing American farmer. And I hope it's something that is relevant and grabs people, especially with everything going on in our economy. But the concept is we told the untold history, all of these hidden areas of history. Why do we have our farms disappearing at the rate of 45,000 per year on average for a century? And we wove that with my family story. We're fourth generation farmers. We've survived weather, farm accidents, all kinds of issues from the Depression to today. And so we try to tell that story to get people to pay attention to what's going on in rural America and how it affects all of us.
Fantastic. The book is Land Rich, Cash Poor. Let's start with IQ. IQ, what kind of questions here do you have for Brian?
Brian, are you still on the farm?
Yeah, great question. My dad is farming. My sister's working to take it over. And I am there. I split my time between there and my home with my wife and daughter. And I kind of travel the country telling our story. But we're still farming. And when I'm back there, they throw me in a tractor on my days off. Like any farm kid, you don't really get a day off. So,
what product do you make? Or what?
So So our farm produces a couple different things. One is beef for consumers. Another is we raise up heifers. We raise up dairy cows that are then milked on other farms. And then we also cash crop. We grow hay, corn, soybeans, different types of wheat. And we're constantly moving into figuring out what else we need to do to diversify.
Do you have 1,000 acres?
We have just under 400 acres. And that used to be a decent sized farm. Now it's on the small side for this country. But
so you're independent. You don't belong to anybody else.
That's right. Yep. Owned and operated by my dad, and he's fourth generation. It's been our family since 1912.
I wish you well. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much.
So Dan Perkins is with us, of course. Dan Perkins Media. Dan, what kind of questions here do you have for Brian? I know as an author and as a entrepreneur, you probably have lots of questions for Brian.
Yeah, I was born and raised in the Midwest, in corn country in Ohio, corn and wheat and beef cattle. Worked on farms when I was a young man. Still in school during the summer, milking cows or collecting eggs or whatever. it's a hard life, but it's a great life because you're in touch with Mother Nature. I'm, I, I have a little bit of problem that farmers. I think the best way to say it, Brian, is got compromised, and I have a particular issue that bothers me. Every time I pull into a gas station and I see regular gas has at least 10% ethanol, we're we're taking corn, which is a basic food source, and turning it into fuel to run gasoline engines in our cars. And uh, we have farmers who are growing just corn or trying to do stronger rotations to grow corn because there is economic benefit in selling your corn for ethanol as opposed to selling it to Green Giant or whoever. Uh, I I really think it's difficult when we have gas when we had gasoline prices at $4 and $5 a gallon that we were spending in an inflationary environment where people were hungry. We were using corn to make a blended gasoline when we should have been using the farmers who know how to grow stuff in this country, even on a 400-acre farm, to produce food for the American people. I think that was a bad policy decision. And I think because of the difficulty in trying to make a living off of farming, it was easy for the farmers to accept selling their corn for ethanol.
Well, we see this all across the history of the American farmer. We see policy decision after policy decision that our government and our political leaders have made where, we prioritize one thing or the other for some particular reason, and then there's a government program that drives farmers toward it. And you said it exactly right from the standpoint of, the farmer is trying to say, okay, where can I make a living? And it's getting harder and harder to grind out a living each year. So they look to that program and they say, well, there's some stability to that income. I'm going to go after that. One of the things we talk about in the book, because of all these policy changes, or excuse me, all these decisions that have piled program on top of program, kind of pushing the farmer to do things that aren't necessarily what they need to be doing to make a living or what the consumer needs them to do, but it's just to satisfy a government program. One of the things we talk about is how our country stopped figuring out how to allow there to be new entrepreneur opportunity for our farmers. So growing new types of food, new types of material, finding innovation, following the market, the farmer finding new entrepreneur opportunity and the consumer having new needs met. We've got a time period here where people care about their food and where it comes from more than ever. But there are so many farms that are locked into old ways of doing things because a government program or some other circumstance has made it kind of, the thing that seems like the economical thing to do, but long term, it's not the best. So I wouldn't disagree from the standpoint of we've got a lot of government programs that have made for kind of a messed up system that we have here. And we've got a lot of farmers who want to make a living feeding people. And I think there's changes we could make to make that easier to do.
Yeah, I've got a couple of quick thoughts for you.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law, who passed away a number of years ago, was a gentleman farmer in Ohio, in the Columbus area, and the government paid him to grow nothing but weeds. So he took his farmland, not as big as yours, maybe 100 acres. He took it out of growing anything because the government paid him not to grow anything. I thought that was a mistake, big time. The other thing is, I think in the new Trump administration, and I don't know whether Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to get that cabinet position or not. But what he's saying to me is, I think, important, and that is, we have the worst diet in the world. We can't eat. There's much of our stuff that we grow here and process here in the United States. Europe won't let us to bring in because it's got too much sugar, too much fat, too many calories. And so I hope that Mr. Kennedy, if he gets the nomination and gets in, I hope that he will begin to seriously work at figuring out what we need to grow and enlist the farmers to be able to participate in growing what we need in a healthy diet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you what, we have the kinds of farms that you're talking about on the first issue, as far as, those that are chasing the government program, what have you, I'll say this: the farms that mainly benefit from that kind of thing are really the largest farms that can figure out the way to cheat them, to basically produce the maximum amount of corn or whatever it is possible. You know what I mean? It's just they max that out and they get the government subsidy. And the issue that we have here is taxpayers feel like their money's being wasted on the one hand, and they're not wrong in various ways. And then on the other hand, we got farmers who aren't really getting the assistance because these programs, they become prone to abuse and favoritism over the years, just like any other type of government. That's what cronyism is. And so it's both true that taxpayers say, what's all this money going to the farmer? Aren't they in okay shape? And your average family farm is saying, hey, we can't make a living because that assistance isn't getting to where it needs to go. And I think the answer is what you're talking about, which is we have more of our family farms that are right now not able to make a living growing our food. They might make some income off of commodity crops and some income off of government programs and other things, but it really isn't a living. It's not new opportunity. So having more of our family farms able to make a full-time living, have more of those small and mid-sized farms able to make a living by growing food that people want to know where it's coming from more than ever. There's a real opportunity to seize on this moment to make a change. And right now we're wiping out our domestic food supply and importing food from all over the globe. What we could be doing is connecting our small and mid-sized farmers with more of those consumers who want to know where their food comes from to create more opportunity for them and strengthen our domestic food supply in the process.
Where is your farm?
Farms in southern Wisconsin in the hills of the Driftless region.
And what's happened to the price of farmland over the last 10 years?
Well, it's skyrocketed, and that's part of the dilemma that we talk about because, to be honest with you, families like mine, I was very lucky to grow up with middle-class living, but it's slipping away year after year. We saw that in our family. Most farm families of our size see that. Unless you got a massive, massive farm, it's very hard to make a living these days. So the value of the land skyrockets. It's worth a lot if you want to sell it, but so many farm families want to be able to hold on to it. They don't want to sell it because it's your home, it's your community, it's your heritage. So land rich cash poor means you aren't making a whole lot of money on that land, and you could sell it, but then you lose everything else.
But part of the problem, whether you sell it or not, part of the problem is as your father ages and eventually leaves you and your wife and children, or hopefully heaven, the government was going to want to evaluate what that farm is worth for state purposes, and the survivors, the children, are responsible for trying to find the money if dad didn't have it set aside to pay the inheritance taxes on greatly appreciated land.
Yep. You are absolutely right. It is hard enough for the next generation. Generally, what happens in a family like mine is the next generation, my sister who is working to take over the farm, generally that new generation turns around and purchases it from the prior generation over time. That's what my dad did with my grandpa, for instance. And part of the problem is if something happens to dad and mom before that, or if you don't have that figured out and dad passes on, as you say, boy, that death tax, it's not only around the death of that family member, it can be the death of the farm because you don't have the ability to pay off those taxes when you transfer that ownership, and it makes a difficult situation even worse. And, it deprives hardworking families of the land they work for at a time when they're in the middle of grief too. It's really a tragic situation. And by the way, that farm that is getting taxed at death has also been taxed for property taxes all throughout the life of that farmer, has been taxed for income. So it's been taxed 3 times or more by the time that death tax kicks in and risks wiping things out.
Well, you may recall Elizabeth Warren was in favor of taxing the unrealized capital gain in property over a certain dollar amount. So you could have farmers who have good-sized farms who hit that threshold, and they would have to pay literally inheritance capital gains taxes, even though they haven't sold the property. And where do they get the money?
Yeah, that's right. It's one of those things where so many people who don't understand what's going on in farm country, they see families that own this acreage, maybe a few hundred acres. A farm owning 400 acres, that's a small amount of land by today's standards of farms. And again, because you're not making a whole lot of money on it, these are people that are scratching to make a middle-class living at best owning that kind of acreage. So on paper, it looks like you own a lot. But actually, the reality is that when you're trying to make a living on that land, it's like working a factory shift or anything else. You are getting by in good circumstances, and it gets harder and harder each year. So people a lot of times mistake holding that land for, boy, that means they must have a whole lot of money, and nothing can be further from the truth. That's what we try to talk about in the book, not only with the issues that are driving the disappearance of our farms, but sharing our stories so that people know, what that way of life is really like. Because as you say, it's both beautiful and filled with all kinds of hardship on the ground.
One last thing, and then I'll give it back to Jim again. One of the things that was talked about because of all the protests on college campuses about Hamas and Israel, people are beginning or continuing, but began as a result of that protest, to question whether or not college is really worth the amount of money that you have to spend anymore. Can you actually, obviously, with $1.6 trillion in college debt and students who can't seem to make the payments, it didn't turn out to be a good deal. But what's happening is that more and more organizations are looking for skilled labor, so that what you're having is schools are now reinstituting skilled labor classes so that people can become plumbers and carpenters and electricians and gardeners and whatever. I'm wondering, are you attracting any younger people who grew up in a farm family that want to stay, or are they leaving the farm?
Boy, that is a really good question. Here's the reality. There are all kinds of kids where I'm from, and I got a number of nephews who are among them, and all kinds of kids in the local community who are part of 4-H. They're part of FFA. These are, groups that are supposed to be training the future farmers of this country. There's kids interested in agriculture, but what they're doing is they're usually going into, the trades, as you say. They might be going to work in another part of agriculture, or they might be leaving the field entirely. And all those things are noble things. Everyone ought to, follow what they think is their true calling. I believe that. But there's a lot of kids out there that would have it be farming rather than the trades, or rather than some other part of agriculture, if they thought there was an economic future in it. You don't have any guidance counselors in high school telling kids, boy, you ought to go farm, either with grandpa or with dad, or if you haven't got anything in the family, you ought to go try to buy a farm. There isn't a single guidance counselor in this country telling kids to go do that, because there isn't a bright economic future for it, And I was lucky to be the first in our family to go to college, and it was the right thing to do for a farm boy who wanted a writing career. But there's so many kids that go off and do other things who I think would farm if there was a bright economic light. And my dad struggled with that when I was coming up through middle school and high school, whether he wanted me to farm, but he also wanted me to have something better because he could see our middle class living slipping away. And my sister coming in wanting to farm, she does that while working more than one job, which is the reality for most small and mid-sized farms. So I think there are kids who want to do it, or who would do it if they saw the economic opportunity with it, but they want to do something that's going to be a bright future, and they got nobody telling them that it is,
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we have got a great guest with us today. He joins us live here on our big broadcast. So Brian, this book, talk to me and Dan and IQ about your writing process.
Yeah, well, it all started with the family stories for me. As I say, it's part, untold history, the big economic and political and technological forces stamping out farms in this country, and then it's part family story. And it began with the family stories. And I grew up working with my dad from the time I could walk. And as long as I remember, I was hearing about farms that were going under, farms that were getting bought, and I want to know why. And so as I pursued my writing career and started to piece this together, I said, we got all these stories. We've got stories of my great-grandfather escaping pre-World War I Europe to come to America to dig a better living out of the dirt. We got my grandpa climbing out of 2 decades of poverty as he grew up in the Depression and other difficult years into the middle class. We got my parents surviving the farm crisis. So we had all these stories, and I started telling these family stories, and I started doing the research around what was going on at that time. And what I found is, and this was the dumb luck part, what I found is that our family, what we were living on the ground with the harsh weather, with the farm accidents, with the different things that happened, it was in alignment with what was going on in the broader economy. So when my parents got married in 1976 and had to survive a drought that first year, they barely got through it, and they survived just in time to come into the farm crisis of the 1980s when tens of thousands of farms were wiped out. So I was fortunate that by following that North Star, trying to tell my family story and research what was going on to farmers at large, that we found that through line to be able to say, hey, here's actually the answer to the question of why are our farms disappearing, what's driving it, and what's the cost to us all.
Yep. So Dan Perkins, do you have any more questions here for Brian?
So do you think Mr. Trump is going to help you?
That's a great question. It's a long road, and he's focused on a couple things that I think are really important to farmers. One of them is figuring out how to reduce costs, get more money in their pocket with tax cuts, reducing the cost of farming with reducing regulations, things like that. There are a lot of farmers who are going to cheer that stuff, and of course, he's got strong support in farm country. There's also a lot of farmers who cheer the idea of getting tough with China and making sure that if we are doing trade in other countries, that we're getting treated fairly and we aren't getting screwed over by some of these either foreign adversaries or countries that are just following different standards than us, have lower costs than us. And that's true. I think that those policies, they need to be crafted the right way. And what I mean by that is if you're going to have tariffs and other things, they have to be tools that are used to get the American farmer a fairer shake. But if they aren't crafted the right way and other countries are able to slap tariffs on American goods being sold abroad, that makes those farmers' goods more expensive. It makes it harder for them to sell it. And that could drive prices down for farmers, which could be devastating for those farmers that are living close to the edge already. So I think there's a lot in what he's talking about that farmers are excited about. And there's parts of that need to be crafted the right way so that we get tough on trade, but we don't harm the prices for the American farmer that is already working so hard to get by.
Good.
IQ.
Brian, listening to you,
Yes.
I go through two extreme emotions.
Hmm.
Number one, I'm very, very sad at the condition of the farmers in America, because what made America were the farmers. There's no question. When everybody went west, what did they do? Cattle and farming. And the other extreme feeling is the anger and the stupidity of the governments that have been running you down.
Yeah, I appreciate
Elon-
that.
Sorry.
I'm
Elon
sorry,
Musk,
go ahead.
by the way, Elon Musk will make the $2 trillion savings if he takes care of the farmers, of the health industry, and of the Defense Department. Minimum, he will make 2 trillion savings.
Yep.
But as you said, it's got to be done in an intelligent manner.
Yep.
But you don't have many intelligent people in Congress. That's the trouble. No, I mean it honestly. I mean it with, and they are stupid. They really are stupid. They make decisions that will affect future generations of America negatively for generations. And they are wrong decisions.
Yeah, I was shocked as we were exploring this, my family and I, our story, and then as I was doing the research into the economic and policy issues that drove these issues, and I could not believe how many mistakes our government made at different points all throughout the process. And by the way, it was Democrats, and it was also the establishment of the Republican Party, and sometimes they repeat each other's mistakes when you go back far enough. And the number of times that we had government policies that ended up stamping out more of our farmers than we need to. There was going to be some natural losses as the economy evolved. There was always going to be some industry consolidation. Those are natural market forces, but we had over and over in our history times where our country, knowingly or unknowingly, was stamping out our farmers. And now it's reached the point that it not only is affecting rural America, but that hollowing out of rural America is affecting our food prices, because you can't have an industry that has such a vulnerable supply chain as we lose so many farms and others participate in our food economy. It's so integrated now. You can have that supply chain disrupted and the price of food can go through the roof. That's part of what we've been seeing the last couple of years. That's why one of the reasons why food is so much more expensive than the rate of inflation. So we're hollowing out rural America, and we're affecting every American dinner table along the way. So I couldn't agree with you more as far as the frustration that I think we feel with what's happened to our farmers and how it affects everybody.
The politicians were making money. These decisions were made corruptly. There's absolutely no doubt. They're not doing it just to hurt you. They're doing it because they are filling their pockets with money. That's why Republicans follow the Democrats and the Democrats follow the Republicans.
Yep.
It's a cesspool. Hopefully, Elon Musk and the others will be able to do something about it. I have absolutely no doubt they will do. Trump is not a stupid man. When he moved in the first time, he was a virgin in a whorehouse. He is now the pimp. He is running the show. And he is going to teach them a lesson they will never forget, maybe for the next 200 years.
Well, my hope is that we can move in a direction that can create new entrepreneur opportunity for our farmers, allow them to supply more of the kinds of food that the American consumer wants, and that we can figure out a way to do this over the long haul. Because to your point, it took a century, it took decades of both parties making mistakes to break it. And it's going to take a lot of people from a lot of different perspectives to be able to fix it over the long haul. So I'm hoping our country can get its focus and keep that focus on it in the long term.
They should start an apprenticeship of farming because this is the future of America. As Dan was saying, getting degrees is like toilet paper now, literally. These students, they're not students, they're troublemakers. They pay $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year to end up with toilet paper called degrees. No, they need apprenticeship in whatever, electricity, electrical repairs, computers, plumbing, but most important
Carpentry.
of all, yeah, anything you can think of. Apprenticeship will be the best.
Well, there's a lot of noble work out there. I think about my dad at the age of 8. We tell the story in the book. My grandpa slipped off a corn crib and fell 30 feet through the air, broke his back on the frozen ground. He eventually got back on his feet, but that led to my dad at the tender age of 8, taking over and starting the work of a man and continue it from there. And, it got down into his blood and his bones, and he loves it. Right now I know he's on the back of a tractor doing his work because that's what he loves to do every day. And when I think about that kind of resilience, I not only admire my dad, but farm families all across this country have that kind of resilience. So if we can find a way to open up opportunity for those families, look at how many, even though we've lost 70% of our farms, there's still nearly 2 million farm families still holding on. Most of them are small farms. They just can't make a full-time income. So we can find a way for them to make a full-time income on their farm again. Imagine these families that are continuing to farm, even though it doesn't work economically, all that resilience. Imagine what they could do if we could make it work again. And then to your point about young kids who have that kind of dedication and devotion, who can be, like that and grow into the type of farmer that my dad was throughout our childhood. I just think if there's a way that we can harness all that resilience and we can find a way to steer kids who want to farm into real economic opportunity, we can solve so many of the problems in our country. And I think that's one of the really important things that you're noting there. I believe that down to my core.
Brian, what's the name of your book again?
Yeah, the book is called Land Rich, Cash Poor.
Sounds very appropriate.
Thank you.
He's right. Land rich, cash poor. That's exactly what's happening. Yeah.
So,
I wish you the best, honestly. It's an excellent idea.
So Brian, looking at all these various things that are going on with the picks and everything for the cabinet, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I think that there's an extraordinary opportunity to try to seize this moment where so many people know there's something broken about our government. So many people from all kinds of different political persuasions don't like a lot of what's been going on with our farm programs. I always say almost everybody could look at one government program or another, from the left, the right, inside farming, outside farming. Everybody's got something they don't like about the way we handle our farm policy right now, right? And you can combine that with the fact that we've got more people than ever who care about where their food comes from. So there's a chance to shake up and change government to make sure that we are allowing and creating real opportunity for our farmers, and we're marrying that with the consumer who wants to know where their food comes from more than ever before. I think there's an opportunity to do that. If we can do that in a way where we craft the policies that allows that opportunity to flourish, it could be a really good thing. But these policies are complicated, these problems are deep, and it's going to be a long haul. So we'll see where it goes. But I'm grateful that we're having the conversation and that issues like this are rising to the fore. I think that's the first step.
Brian, is there anybody in Congress who speaks your language? I've never heard of anybody.
Yeah, that's a good question. There have been different, I'll say, there have been different independent-minded Republicans and blue-collar-minded Democrats who have over the years. One example, he's a kind of a proudly cantankerous guy, is Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa. And I'm not here to endorse any one particular person, but he's somebody who's been a farmer all his life, and he brings kind of that farmer sense to Congress. And so I think whoever they are, whatever their political persuasion, having more people who are rooted in farm country is a good thing, because I think one of the problems that we have is so many members of Congress don't understand what's going on the ground with our farms, let alone being able to connect it to the food supply. So we got a lot of policy decisions being disconnected from the reality of these issues. And so we need more people like that.
Brian, they're not only disconnected from your farms, they're disconnected from everything. This is why America was failing, for God's sake.
Mm.
You are failing in every category.
Mm.
Education, health, you name it, you're failing. God willing, it will be changed now. Trump is not president yet. And yet his tweet, his X, whatever he's writing on X, is changing the outside world. He is telling them he's going to put tariffs 25% on Canada, 25% on Mexico, and 10% extra on China. And all three of them now are paying attention. He is not even president. By the time he gets into the presidency, which is in January, he will be starting to run immediately, not like in 2016. 2000, I mean, yeah. No, not last time he was a new guy. Today he is a very accomplished person. And what he picked were people who have no attachment to any of the swamp. They're completely outside the swamp. I have very good feelings for the future. What do you think, Dan? What do you think?
I think I agree with you. We were talking before Brian got here that Jim asked me about what I thought about the picks, and I think that they're a diverse group of people that are all very talented. They're making a lot of people on the Hill very nervous, which is a good thing, and they're making the bureaucracy nervous, which is a good thing, and I think he's going to bring about a great deal of change. There's going to be pain as hundreds of thousands of federal employees get laid off, but it's time they experience what the private sector has been dealing with over the years of layoffs by the thousands because of the economy didn't do well. And the government can't continue to spend money it doesn't have and pay people $135,000 a year on average to work in Washington, D.C. in a government bureaucratic job. So I'm looking forward to it with great anticipation.
Well, and part of the challenge we have is over the years, both parties have, in the case of farm policy, have piled one policy on top of the other. And, we could have a discussion and debate, is this program a good idea or bad idea? And is it doing what it should or shouldn't? But that's not really the discussion our country has at this point. We keep piling programs one on top of the other. Sometimes they're contradictory. They never really get fully reformed or examine how they're working to a deep level. And so you got all of these government programs piled on top of one another, doing different things, open to abuse and favoritism, the money not getting where it ought to go. And so people are frustrated, their money's being wasted, and people are frustrated, farmers are suffering. And so, that massive bureaucracy of the government leads to so much confusion and obfuscation around what's really happening. So I'm hopeful that, over the long haul, we can reform these programs, make sure they're working the way they ought to, and allow farmers in the market to meet the needs of the consumers.
Where can we get your book, sir?
Well, I appreciate that. Land Rich Cash Poor is available on Amazon and anywhere else online you buy books, and then bookstores nationwide, and they'll have it for you. They can get it for you. And I'm just grateful for anybody who's picking it up, talking about these issues, keeping the conversation going.
Have you had any results, do you think? I mean, how is your book selling?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, we've gone through our first printing. We're well into our second printing. And I know that we've had sales all across the country, and we've had a lot of momentum getting this conversation going. Now, we're also writing about flyover country. So there's books about political scandals and things going on in New York and D.C. and all kinds of things that are coming in conflict. So we're working really hard to keep the word out there. But I've been so grateful, whether it is big cities, small towns, Texas, California, Wisconsin, Iowa, up in Canada. I've had people from all over the country, all over the North American continent, buying the book, getting the conversation going. So we're off to a really strong start, and we're just trying to keep it going.
Good luck.
Right.
Good luck.
I'm going to make a quick suggestion for you. You don't
Yeah,
have
please.
to take it, but think about it. I would like you to think about looking at both in the House and the Senate, the committees that are responsible for agriculture and the new Secretary of Agriculture under Donald Trump that's coming in. Send them all a copy of your book.
Mm,
Yep.
And
that's a great idea.
in the inside cover, put your phone number, your email address, and say, if you want to talk about this very important issue to me and other farmers, call me.
I love it. I love it. We need to get that conversation going. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. That definitely is something you should be entertaining, Brian. Because
Absolutely. I
because
appreciate it, guys.
if they don't see it, someone will.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
what are some of the things that you learned over your time that has gone away from the modern farm?
Yeah. You know, one of the things that was shocking to me, and this is actually a private sector challenge as well as a government challenge, is the way that technology that can cater to all farms went away. So we used to have something in this country called scale neutral technology, where what that means is not only a large farm, but a medium and a small size farm can justify buying that technology, following through on that innovation, because it'll do what my dad would call penciling out. You know, you buy it and over the next 5, 10 years, the savings that you have can help pay for that technology. And that's how farms grew and evolved for many, many years. We stopped producing enough of that technology in this country. Our research and development in the private sector as well as government began to focus so much on what it took for farms to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so we've got all kinds of medium and small size farms that might be just as efficient pound for pound and just as well run. Now they're not as big, so they can't buy things in bulk, and there's certain types of market power they aren't going to have. But we didn't need to have our technology tilting the scales against these small farms as well. So you had farms that, and this really happened in the 70s and 80s. So farms like my mom and dad's that went into the farm crisis after surviving drought, faced a government-induced crisis that wiped out tens of thousands of farms. They came out on the other end of it with less and less technology that was there to help them evolve, even though they'd survived the worst of it, and had the resilience to keep going. So I was shocked to hear that we've had really, private sector technological innovation leave our small and medium-sized farms behind, and that's kind of one of those needless things that didn't have to happen, and we can change that. We can focus on making sure that we've got technological innovation that's helping farms of all sizes, and they can be a more meaningful part of our food supply if we do that.
That's awesome.
Brian, when I was growing up, my aunts and uncles down on a farm in Appalachia in southeastern Ohio, they had corn pickers that picked 3 rows at a time. Now I saw last night on television corn pickers that'll pick 20 rows at a time.
Yep. Yep. You're exactly right. The dairy example, now our family milked dairy cows for 100 years. And as I said, we're still farming, but we've diversified since. We raised beef, we raised dairy cows for other farms, and we cash crop. When my parents were starting out, they had a sickness that spread through the herd. It was a freak thing. It was an infection. And the way that they addressed it, part of the way they addressed it is they installed a pipeline in the barn that took the milk straight from the cow's udder to the cooling tank. That was an innovation that could be done that for a small farm like ours was economical to do. And thank God that it was, because it helped my parents save their herd and save the farm. And in future generations, in the 90s and the 2000s, 2010s, there really weren't new innovations like that a small farm could adopt to make their operation more efficient. It was only great big milking parlors. And that's kind of like the corn head you're talking about, going from 3 rows to 20 rows. We used to have these changes where farms of all sizes could adopt a new type of technology that would make their operation better. Now, all they can really do is get bigger and bigger. And so the farms are forced to get bigger, get out. You build a great big milking parlor or something like that. That's many of them the only option they have. And they either have to do that, or they're going to have to sell their farm, or they're going to go under.
Now, Brian, as we go, what is next for you as an author?
Yeah, well, right now we're trying to elevate these issues as much as possible, but I'm interested in telling the hidden stories of rural America. And so this was my debut book, and it was my opportunity to tell a hidden story about what's happening to farm families like mine and how it affects everybody else. And I want to tell more of those stories. There's more stories to tell in farm country. There's more stories to tell in middle America and small towns all across this country. And I think there's ways that it affects every single American dinner table, affects every single neighborhood in ways that are unseen. So I'm looking for that next hidden story from rural America to tell, because I'm grateful for the chance to tell this one, and I just hope to keep it going.
Can I
Fantastic.
make another suggestion?
Yeah, please.
Take those stories and start sending them to the Farmer's Almanac to get them printed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So as we wrap up here, let's start with IQ Al Rizzoli. IQ, how do we get your book, my friend?
My books are in Amazon, Lifting the Veil, The True Faces of Muhammad and Islam. Nothing compared to Brian.
Too kind.
So Dan, what's going on with some of your projects, and bring us up to speed on some of the different things.
We just had a phenomenal phone call today. It's our second with a potential partner that is so excited about the fentanyl product that we have for testing. He has access to 200 million people.
Wow.
And if things go right the rest of the week, we could literally start marketing product next week to hundreds of millions of people.
Mm.
Saves lives. I'm excited.
It's amazing. So Dan, how do we get your books?
Dan Perkins Media and .org is a place that is a multi-purpose website that deals with books and shows and commentary and radio and musings. So you can start there, and then there are tailings off to other websites that could take you to songs and stories and other ones. And but danperkinsmedia.org is the place to go.
Well, it is fantastic. I appreciate everybody for making time, and I guess real quick, because we've got a couple minutes here, let's go around IQ. With it being Thanksgiving on Thursday, what are you thankful for, my friend?
For having you guys in my life. What do you want? Bloody hell.
I thought he was going to go with Trump getting reelected, but he decided to tug at the heartstrings.
He is already reelected. I'm not worried about him anymore.
Well, Brian, what are you thankful for this holiday season, my friend?
I'll tell you, I've been fortunate to be traveling the country with the book, and right now I'm back home in Wisconsin on the home farm with my wife and daughter, and I'm grateful for my daughter being able to still have tractor rides with her grandpa for the time being, and I hope she can grow up seeing the farm for many years to come.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, last but not least, Dangerous Dan Perkins. What are you thankful for this holiday season, sir?
I'm thankful for that there are two projects that I'm working on that, if they come to fruition, and one I just told you about, that this will be the year that I started a major campaign to start saving lives of people who are dealing with drug overdoses and people who are being shot to death with lethal weapons. So that's starting this year and hopefully continues next year and beyond. It's exciting for me to reach out and try and help my fellow man whenever I can.
That is amazing. Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate you making time for us today. Thanks for coming on. And Brian, good luck with the book, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation with all of you guys. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you,
Thank
gentlemen.
you.
There
Thank
they
you.
go. That is IQ Al Rizzoli, the fantastic Dan Perkins. And that wraps it up here for this edition of our big broadcast. We thank you for taking as much time as you did and hanging out today and all that. And we will see you next time. Thanks for joining us. You have been listening to the world famous Jiggy Jaguar radio broadcast, available on iHeartRadio, Odyssey of all places, and more.